In the early years of the 20th century, California was a land of boundless promise. It was the Golden State, a destination for dreamers and builders who had journeyed west, seeking fortune and a new beginning. The landscape was a tapestry of rolling hills, fertile valleys, and a dramatic coastline that met the vast Pacific Ocean. San Francisco stood as the crown jewel of this burgeoning region. It was the largest city on the West Coast, a bustling metropolis teeming with life, ambition, and a unique cosmopolitan energy. It was a city built on the fortunes of the gold rush, a hub of commerce, culture, and finance that looked confidently toward an even greater future. Its future, everyone believed, was as bright as the California sun. The city itself was a wonder to behold. Cable cars climbed its impossibly steep hills, their bells ringing out a familiar city song. Grand Victorian homes, known as painted ladies, stood shoulder to shoulder, their ornate facades a testament to the wealth that flowed through the city's veins. The port was a forest of masts, with ships arriving from every corner of the globe, bringing goods, people, and ideas. San Francisco was a city of contrasts, where immigrant communities from China, Italy, and Ireland carved out their own vibrant neighborhoods just blocks from the opulent mansions of Nob Hill. It was a city that felt permanent, a solid and unshakable center of the American West, a place where the future was being built day by day. This sense of permanence was woven into the very fabric of the city's identity. By 1906, its population had swelled to over 400,000, making it one of the 10 largest cities in the United States. It was the financial capital of the West, home to banks, stock exchanges, and the headquarters of major corporations. Its opera houses, theaters, and restaurants rivaled those of New York and Paris. The city was a beacon of progress and sophistication, a testament to what could be achieved in just a few short decades. People walked the streets with a sense of pride, believing they lived in the most exciting and dynamic city in the world, a city destined for greatness and forever safe on its perch by the bay. But beneath the cobblestone streets and the grand stone buildings, a secret power lay dormant. The very geology that had created the region's stunning beauty, the dramatic hills and the sweeping bay, was also its greatest threat. The people of San Francisco went to sleep on the night of April 17, 1906 with no thought of danger. They were unaware that the ground beneath their feet was not as solid as it seemed. They did not know that a force of unimaginable power was straining, ready to be unleashed. The city was poised on the edge of a cataclysm that would, in less than a minute, shatter its foundations and change its destiny forever. Deep beneath the golden hills of California lies a colossal fracture in the Earth's crust. It is called the San Andreas Fault. This is not just a crack in the rock, it is the meeting place of two immense sections of our planet, two tectonic plates. To the west is the Pacific Plate, a massive slab of crust that carries the floor of the Pacific Ocean. To the east is the North American Plate, which carries the entire continent. These two giants are not still. They are in constant slow-motion conflict, grinding against each other as they move in opposite directions. The Pacific Plate inches northwest, while the North American Plate moves southeast, a silent, relentless geological dance. This movement is the fundamental reason earthquakes happen in California. Most of the time, the plates slide past each other smoothly, the friction managed by the immense pressure of the earth above. But in many places along the fault, the rough edges of the plates get stuck. They lock together, and while the rest of the plates continue to move, stress begins to build at these locked points. Year after year, decade after decade, the strain accumulates like the winding of a giant spring. The rock bends and deforms, storing incredible amounts of energy, waiting for the moment when the friction can no longer hold the plates in place. When that moment finally comes, the release is sudden and violent. The locked sections of the fault rupture and the stored energy is unleashed in the form of seismic waves. These waves radiate outward from the point of rupture, shaking the ground with terrifying force. This is an earthquake. The longer the plates have been locked, the more energy is stored, and the more powerful the resulting quake will be. The San Andreas Fault is over 800 miles long, a massive scar running the length of California. And its history is written in a long series of these sudden, violent ruptures that have shaped the land over millions of years. In 1906, the people of San Francisco lived directly on top of this geologic powder keg. The city had experienced smaller tremors before, but few understood the true nature of the force that lay sleeping beneath them. The science of seismology was in its infancy. No one knew that a 296-mile segment of the San Andreas Fault, from San Juan Bautista to Cape Mendocino, had been locked for decades, accumulating an immense strain. The unseen giant was tense, ready to slip. The beautiful, thriving city of San Francisco was unknowingly in the crosshairs of one of the greatest geological forces on the planet, about to become a lesson for the world. The morning of Wednesday, April 18, 1906, began like any other. The city was mostly dark and quiet, the first hints of dawn still an hour away. Milkmen were beginning their routes with horse-drawn wagons, their bottles clinking softly in the pre-dawn stillness. A few early workers were making their way through the streets, and bakers were tending to their ovens. At 5:12 a.m., a small tremor, a foreshock, was felt by some. It was a brief rattle, enough to stir a light sleeper, but not enough to cause widespread alarm. It was a subtle warning, a faint whisper from the deep earth that went almost entirely unheeded. 25 seconds later, the world came apart. The main shock struck without any further warning. The ground did not just shake, it lurched and convulsed with a violence that defied comprehension. The rupture on the San Andreas Fault, just a few miles offshore, sent catastrophic seismic waves racing toward the city. For nearly a minute, the solid earth behaved like a liquid. Eyewitnesses described seeing the ground roll in waves several feet high, making it impossible to stand. The sound was a deafening roar, a combination of the grinding earth, the groaning of twisted steel, and the splintering of countless wooden structures. It was a sound no one had ever heard before, the sound of a city being torn from its foundations. People were thrown from their beds, furniture slid across floors and crashed into walls. In the streets, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Buildings swayed violently, their brick facades shedding tons of masonry onto the sidewalks below. Ornate cornices, chimneys, and water towers rained down on the streets, crushing everything in their path. The ground itself split open in places, creating deep fissures. The noise, the violent motion, and the terrifying realization that the very ground was no longer solid created a primal fear in everyone who experienced it. In less than 60 seconds, the prosperous and proud city of San Francisco was reduced to a state of primitive chaos. The initial damage was staggering. Buildings that were poorly constructed or built on unstable landfill, an area known as made ground near the waterfront, simply disintegrated. The magnificent City Hall, a structure that had taken 20 years to build and was meant to stand for centuries, was left a hollowed-out skeleton, its massive dome stripped bare. Grand hotels, bustling marketplaces, and thousands of homes collapsed into heaps of rubble. The shaking was felt from southern Oregon to Los Angeles and as far inland as central Nevada. But for the people of San Francisco, it was an intimate and personal apocalypse, a moment that forever divided their lives into two parts, before the earthquake and after. In the immediate aftermath of the shaking, a stunned silence fell over the city, punctuated by the cries of the injured and the terrified. As the dust began to settle, the scale of the destruction became terrifyingly clear. Streets that had been familiar just moments before were now impassable, choked with mountains of debris from fallen buildings. The proud Victorian homes that defined the city's character were now splintered ruins. Brick structures had fared the worst. Entire walls had peeled away, exposing the private lives within, like rooms in a dollhouse. The city's infrastructure, the complex web of pipes, wires, and rails that kept it alive, was severed. The human toll was immediate and devastating. Thousands were killed or trapped in the wreckage of their own homes. The initial shock gave way to a desperate scramble for survival. People clawed through rubble with their bare hands trying to reach loved ones buried beneath. The chaos was absolute. There was no central authority, no communication, and no understanding of the full scope of the disaster. Panic set in as survivors, many still in their nightclothes, stumbled through the ruined streets trying to make sense of the nightmare that had just unfolded. The city had been wounded, grievously, but its ordeal was only just beginning. In less than a minute, more than 28,000 buildings had been damaged or destroyed by the shaking alone. The elegant mansions on Nob Hill, the crowded tenements south of Market, and the bustling commercial buildings downtown all suffered immense damage. Solid ground had proven to be a myth. The areas built on reclaimed land, created by filling in parts of the bay, had liquefied during the quake. The soil, saturated with water, lost its strength and behaved like quicksand, causing entire city blocks to sink and collapse. The physical landscape of the city had been violently rewritten in a matter of seconds. The initial death toll was tragically underestimated in the chaos, with early reports putting the number around 700. Officials, eager to downplay the disaster to protect real estate values and the city's reputation, suppressed the true figures. It would take decades for historians to piece together the full story. Modern estimates now place the number of deaths at over 3,000, making it the deadliest natural disaster in California's history. For the survivors, the world had been turned upside down. They had lost their homes, their neighbors, and their sense of security. And as they stood amidst the ruins, a new, more sinister threat was beginning to rise from the rubble. Section 5, an inferno born from the shaking. As the ground ceased its violent convulsions, a new enemy emerged from the wreckage. Across the broken city, fires began to flicker to life. The earthquake had been the kindling. The fires would become the inferno. The shaking had toppled chimneys, severed gas lines, and overturned stoves and lanterns. In kitchens where breakfast was being prepared, overturned coals spilled onto wooden floors. In homes lit by gas lamps, broken pipes spewed flammable gas into the air, just waiting for a spark. Within minutes of the quake, dozens of small fires had started, scattered like deadly seeds throughout the ruins. One of the most infamous blazes became known as the Ham and Eggs Fire. It began in a house on Hayes Street where a woman, reportedly unaware that her chimney had been damaged, decided to make breakfast for her family. When she lit her stove, sparks ignited the fractured flue, and the fire quickly spread to the roof. This single, seemingly innocent act started a conflagration that would eventually consume City Hall and vast swaths of the surrounding neighborhoods. It was a tragic symbol of the disaster. Small individual fires born of routine and necessity, coalescing into an unstoppable force of destruction that would prove far more devastating than the earthquake itself. The fires grew with terrifying speed, feeding on the city's countless wooden structures. They merged with one another, creating super fires that generated their own wind, sucking in oxygen and spreading embers for blocks. The flames swept through the densely packed neighborhoods, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. The financial district, with its fireproof buildings, was thought to be safe, but the intense heat of the approaching firestorm was so great that it shattered windows, allowing the flames to gut the buildings from the inside out, leaving behind empty, blackened shells. The city was being systematically erased by a sea of fire. For 3 days and 4 nights the Great Fire raged. It burned with a ferocity that stunned all who witnessed it. From across the bay in Oakland, people watched in horror as the city that had been the pride of the West Coast was consumed by a pillar of smoke and flame that rose miles into the sky. The fire ultimately destroyed over 500 city blocks, an area covering more than 4 square miles. It was this conflagration, not the initial tremor, that caused the vast majority of the property damage. The earthquake had broken the city's bones, but the fire incinerated its heart. Section 6. The futile battle against the flames. As the fires began their relentless march across the city, the one force that could have stopped them was already crippled. The San Francisco Fire Department, renowned for its bravery, was rendered almost powerless from the start. The earthquake had shattered the city's water mains, turning a network of high-pressure pipes into a useless collection of broken tubes. When firefighters arrived at the scene of a blaze and connected their hoses to the hydrants, they were met with a pathetic trickle, or nothing at all. They had the engines, the equipment, and the will to fight, but they did not have the one thing they needed most: water. The disaster was compounded by a tragic loss of leadership. The city's respected fire chief, Dennis T. Sullivan, was mortally wounded when a chimney from an adjacent hotel crashed through the fire station and into his bedroom. He lingered for a few days before succumbing to his injuries, leaving the department leaderless at its most critical hour. Without their chief and without water, the firefighters were forced to watch helplessly as small, manageable fires grew into uncontrollable infernos. They were warriors without weapons, facing an enemy that was growing stronger by the minute, consuming everything in its path. In a desperate attempt to halt the fire's advance, city officials turned to a radical and dangerous strategy: dynamite. The plan was to demolish buildings in the path of the flames to create fire breaks, robbing the fire of its fuel. But this was a task that required skill and experience, both of which were in short supply. The soldiers and civilians tasked with the job often used too much dynamite, or used it incorrectly. Instead of neatly collapsing buildings, the powerful explosions often scattered burning debris, starting new fires on the other side of the intended firebreak. In many cases, the effort to stop the fire only helped it spread faster. For days, the battle raged. Firefighters, soldiers, and ordinary citizens worked side by side, their faces blackened with soot, their bodies pushed to the limits of exhaustion. They pumped water from the bay, a futile effort given the scale of the blaze. They tore down buildings with their bare hands. They stood their ground against the overwhelming heat, making heroic but hopeless stands to save a block here, a building there. But the fire was too large, too powerful. It would only stop when it had nothing left to burn, finally reaching the wide expanse of Van Ness Avenue on one side and running out of fuel at the waterfront on the other. The fight was over, and the fire had won. Section 7. The human spirit in the ruins. In the midst of the chaos and destruction, the city's social order broke down, revealing both the worst and the best of human nature. With the police force overwhelmed, the U.S. Army was called in from the nearby Presidio to restore order, prevent looting, and aid the terrified population. Soldiers patrolled the smoldering streets with fixed bayonets. Mayor Eugene Schmitz issued a controversial proclamation that anyone caught looting would be shot on sight. While some instances of looting did occur, many of the stories were exaggerated, part of the widespread fear and uncertainty that gripped the ruined city. The disaster left an estimated 250,000 people, half the city's population, homeless. In a vast, spontaneous exodus, survivors flocked to the city's open spaces. Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and every other park and square were transformed overnight into massive refugee camps. People constructed makeshift shelters out of anything they could find, salvaged lumber, scraps of tin, and bits of canvas. These tent cities became communities of necessity, where strangers shared food, water, and stories of survival. The army established soup kitchens and distribution points, providing basic sustenance to the displaced masses who had lost everything. Aid began to pour in from across the country and around the world. Railroads offered free transportation for refugees wanting to leave the city and for supplies coming in. Other cities sent money, food, and clothing. The disaster captured the world's attention, and the outpouring of support was a powerful testament to a shared sense of humanity. It was in the insurance industry, however, that one of the most significant acts of faith in the city's future took place. Many policies excluded damage from earthquakes, but companies like Lloyd's of London made the monumental decision to pay all claims in full, a move that pumped vital capital into the city and cemented their own reputation for generations. The stories of individual resilience were countless. There was the banker, Amedeo Giannini, who rescued the gold and assets from his fledgling Bank of Italy, hiding them under crates of oranges on a wagon. He set up a makeshift bank on a plank supported by 2 barrels on the waterfront, providing loans to residents and businesses to begin rebuilding. There were families who fought to save their homes with wet blankets and buckets of water, and there were the countless, nameless acts of kindness, a shared meal, a comforting word, a helping hand extended to a stranger, that defined the spirit of the survivors in the days after the quake. Section 8. A city reborn from ash and science. The rebuilding of San Francisco began almost before the embers had cooled. The spirit of the city, though battered, was not broken. A powerful sense of civic pride and a defiant can-do attitude took hold. The mantra became, "The damnedest, finest ruins," a testament to the city's refusal to be defeated. While some ambitious plans were drawn up for a grand, redesigned city with wide boulevards like Paris, they were largely dismissed in the rush to rebuild. Property owners and businesses wanted to get back on their feet as quickly as possible, and so the city was largely reconstructed along its old street grid, but this time, with a crucial difference. The disaster served as a brutal but effective lesson in urban planning and engineering. New, far stricter building codes were enacted. The catastrophic failure of brick and masonry buildings led to a widespread shift towards steel frame construction, a method far more resistant to the forces of an earthquake. The fires highlighted the desperate need for a reliable water supply, leading to the creation of a separate high-pressure water system dedicated solely to firefighting, with massive underground cisterns placed at key intersections throughout the city, a system that remains in place to this day. San Francisco was rebuilding not just with wood and steel, but with the hard-won knowledge of its own destruction. Despite the heroic rebuilding effort, the earthquake permanently altered the trajectory of California. Before 1906, San Francisco was the undisputed economic and cultural center of the West, but the disaster diverted trade, investment, and population growth southward. Los Angeles, which was spared any significant damage, seized the opportunity. It grew rapidly in the following decades, eventually surpassing San Francisco in size and influence. While San Francisco would rise again, hosting the spectacular Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915 to showcase its recovery, it would never reclaim the singular dominance it had once held. The legacy of the 1906 earthquake extends far beyond the city limits. It was one of the first major natural disasters to be scientifically studied in depth. Geologist Harry Fielding Reid's investigation of the rupture led to his groundbreaking elastic rebound theory, which remains the fundamental principle of modern earthquake science. The lessons learned in 1906 about building codes, emergency preparedness, and seismic risk have informed how cities are built all over the world. Even today, as a minor tremor was felt just yesterday on September 22, 2025, from the nearby Hayward Fault, it serves as a reminder. It reminds us that the Great Fault still sleeps beneath, and that the vigilance born from the ashes of 1906 is the city's greatest defense against the inevitable day when the big one will come again.